Well, welcome everyone. I think we're all familiar with Zoom, so we can jump right into the agenda. Kate, do you normally share the file or should I be sharing the meeting packet stuff?
It's up to you if you want to show it on the screen. I find then you can't see people as well. But we can share it if you want.
You could do a little, you could see everybody if you change how you view them.
In
You know
the
what I mean? So
tile.
you could do the view if
Yeah.
you want.
Yeah.
That's a good way.
Okay, I figured I'd just bring it up. So the first item is to approve the minutes or to get comments on the minutes from the last meeting. I believe, Warren, thank you for jumping in and putting those together. If folks had a chance to review, can I get someone to move to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I will second that.
All right, the minutes are approved.
So you have to vote.
You have to vote.
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Everyone, sorry, excuse me. I'm failing here. My first task, chair.
No worries.
Ah.
You're
We
learning.
need a new chair.
Uh,
You volunteering?
I already have insurrection. The job's yours, Brian. Okay, so how should we do this? Should we raise, let's see, we can raise our hands virtually, or you can just raise your hands physically. So everyone who approves?
Approved.
All right. Thank you. Minutes approved. All right, we'll move right into the chair's update. So couple of things. I attended the chair's breakfast for the first time, which was this morning. And so that was informative to get an update on what all the other groups that were there were doing. The main update from that is the time frame on the town meeting. So it has moved to the second Sunday in June. And that the hope of moving it was just basically because of COVID and concerns around trying to have this outside in April and where we were going to be. They wanted to make sure that if we had to be outside, that it would be hopefully better weather. So that's the date. So that gives us some more time for working through anything that we might want to bring in front of the town meeting, as well as all the other committees and organizations. So that was, I think that was the main update that I'd bring back from there that I think is relevant for the team. The other thing I just wanted to
one question.
Oh, yep. Go ahead.
Was there discussion of like with the warrant article deadline, which I think is usually end of year, would that also shift a few months?
Yes, great question. I forgot to mention that. So I believe that deadline has moved to February. I don't have the exact date, but it's the February timeframe.
Thanks.
Yep. The other thing I wanted to just, it was sort of, Kate and I were going back through some other documents, and one of the things I don't know if we ever voted on, but I just wanted to kind of propose that we adopt these ground rules for moving forward. So let me just figure out here, get back into the meeting controls so I can share this other document. Share. So this came, we liberally borrowed this from Cambridge. I think John had shared this a while ago. And we just retitled it, but I think it seems to be what we've been trying to do as a group, and I think fairly non-controversial. So if anyone wants to propose that we adopt this, then we can get a second and vote. Obviously can make some quick adjustments, but I just wanted to see if we kind of officially adopt this.
Can you zoom in a bit?
Yes. I'm sorry that that's not, oops, you. that better? I think we'll just have to figure out how to make sure we can make this work through Zoom. Obviously, it's a little bit different with the technology.
Do you propose a mechanism for enforcing some of these? Or,
I think it's
or
just,
encouraging?
yeah, I think it's just all of us kind of trying to keep that in mind, and as needed, we can talk through if there are concerns.
You can cut our mic off.
Hi, John. Didn't see you.
That's a
And
good
Courtney's
way.
here too. Welcome.
Yeah, these
So we're just taking a look at these. We don't have to vote on this now. It's fine. I don't want to put like, I don't want anyone to feel pressured. But just proposing that we try and adopt these at some point. So,
I'd be willing to vote on adopting them now. I don't know if other folks prefer to wait.
It would be consistent with the final bullet to vote now.
Yeah, they make a lot of sense to me to have an orderly meeting. So I think we could vote
Yeah,
on it if we
yeah.
feel like we need that.
okay. So everyone in favor of adopting these meeting ground rules? All right. We will adopt these. Thank you. Let me switch back to the agenda here. So the other thing that we were chatting about a little bit before, I think before John and Courtney and a few others came on, was the update to our membership. So in case you haven't heard, I think you saw the email from Pam. Pam is taking a position on the light board. And Brian is here, but just as an attendee, because he has also taken a position on the light board. So we have 2 CAB alums joining the light board, which is, I think, great news. It's great to see that they're going to be able to help support the light plan and transitioning to renewable energy and all the other key elements that align, I think, with our action plan. So Kate mentioned that there was a question about the size of the board of CAB, and that brings us down to 8. That's including Peter, who, as you all know, has been out with his cancer diagnosis, and hopefully, getting stronger every day. But so one option that we could look to do is to recruit another member. I think the benefit of having a smaller group might just be, the ability to be a little bit more nimble. So I think that, I'm open to hearing feedback on either of those, but at this point we have 8 members. I think our charter says we can have 9 or at least 9. Kate, correct me if I think I may have misstated a few things there, but.
No, that's right. The charter says 9. So that means a quorum of 5 either way.
Yeah,
If the quorum, sorry, go ahead, Warren.
so I was going to say, given that, Peter may not be able to make the meetings regularly, there may be a virtue to have 9 people because of it being easier to meet a quorum of 5.
Yeah. What's the, Kate, what is the process? Is that a green card, and who would be selecting? How would we go about getting another member on the board?
Yeah, so there's, we could get a list of green cards that are in for CAB from the town manager's office. And typically it would be a process where Jake would kind of look at the list and maybe talk to some folks. And then it's ultimately a town manager appointment.
Kate, this is usually also discussed with the select board. So it would be you know, Jake, you should feel free to reach out.
Okay. I will. Thank you.
I like the idea of reviewing and seeing what other people that may like to join the board, following what Warren was saying, and see if we think that it would just add more talent to the group.
I agree with that.
Okay, thanks for your input on that. That's all I had for my update. There's a couple other things we're going to be working through tonight, but I wanted to hand it over to Kate for her update.
Great, thanks. So a few things I put in my update is in the meeting packet that have been going on recently. We finished up Climate Preparedness Week at the end of September, which was a number of virtual events that went really well. So I shared a link to the recording of one of the presentations we did with 2 climate reality leaders. That was really fun. One was our friend Keith Bergman, who lives in town and has been on a number of boards and did a really great climate reality presentation with a Concord spin. So definitely check that out if you're bored and poking around YouTube. We have a couple of electric vehicle events. One was yesterday, and they're also doing a replay event on Saturday. So it's a roundtable with local dealers talking about models that are available and advocates, and there will be kind of replay of the presentations, but then live Q&A on the Saturday replay. So if you're interested in getting your questions answered or know anyone who is thinking about driving electric, that would be a good event for that. I also wanted to share, I have mentioned before that I'm part of this library corporation sustainability planning efforts, and that's moving along at a pretty quick pace, which is great. So the planning committee hosted 2 community input sessions during Climate Prep Week, but there's also a temporary website with information on their baselining process and the planning process. So if you're interested in seeing what's going on with that project and providing any feedback, you can check out that website and I'll keep you posted as it's been moving along. And then in some good news, I've been meeting with town staff about opting into the state's PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is one of the implementation steps in the Climate Action Plan. It's a financing mechanism for commercial properties to make energy efficiency improvements or clean energy investments in their property that's funded on their tax bill. So it's a really good model that's been used in Connecticut for many years and was recently launched in Massachusetts. And the process for Concord opting in would just be the select board signing on a resolution. So I'm moving forward with getting that on an upcoming agenda, and hopefully that will be a pretty smooth process to get us opted in to PACE, and just a really good resource for commercial buildings to be taking the energy steps that we all hope that they will. And then lastly,
Kate, can I ask a question about that? This is really a great
Sure.
step forward because that fits into one of the areas that we talked about financing. What committees or town staff and what was the feedback that they had on this? Is this getting an enthusiastic, welcoming on it, or what was your sense of that?
Yeah, so far it's been positive. Because Concord already does betterment assessments, the logistics of getting it set up are pretty straightforward. So that was good news. And, generally speaking, people seem to think that this was a good thing to move forward and something that, folks would be interested in taking advantage of.
With the light plant, were they involved in any way briefing on this?
Yeah, they were in, I updated them on the program and they were in on the meetings too.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, it's good. So I'll keep you guys posted. And then lastly, we had applied for a META grant, a Municipal Energy Technical Assistance Grant, a small grant that we've used before. And unfortunately, we were notified we did not receive the grant. This is going to be for a fleet electrification study. But the good news is that we're going to be moving forward to do this study regardless. So we'll be able to move that work forward in terms of looking at the town's municipal fleet and how we electrify that and build that into our budgeting process, and also plan for the infrastructure necessary to charge a future fleet of EVs. So I'm excited that that's going to move forward regardless. And that's it.
Hey, Kate, could I ask a question? The kids video, where was that, I guess, published? Is it something, you know, could we publish it in maybe some of the like school publications if it wasn't already?
Yeah, it's so this is the climate reality and how to talk to your kids about it. The speaker was Harriet Sugarman, who has an organization called Climate Mama. And so we broadcast it live on Facebook Live, but now it's also on YouTube. So I can share the link, and if there's groups that you think would be interested, we can definitely share that around. She was supposed to come to Concord and be a speaker for the Climate Solutions series that some folks from Concord Can and others put together. And she was supposed to come this spring, but obviously that didn't happen. So hopefully they'll be able to bring her back for an in-person longer session at some future date. Because I think there was a lot of interest among parents in hearing her speak. She has a book out too, so that's a little bit about what she talked about.
Okay.
Okay. Can I ask if is the library project about the facilities, or is it also include covering programming?
It's all of the above. So it's shaping up to be a focus area on the facility, the building and the operations, and then also the education and outreach, because obviously the library plays a really key role in as a community hub and educator.
Yep, that's great.
Any other questions for Kate? Oops. Okay. All right, so next on the agenda, we have Alice and Kate up to give us some updates on the RMI Accelerator for building electrification.
Great, thanks. Alice, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to give folks an update on where we are with the RMI Accelerator? You're muted if you are.
Sorry.
There we go.
Little mouse problem there. Sure, I'll talk a little bit. So the Building Accelerator project has been providing an enormous number of documents and resources for towns, cities and towns, to help us meet a mandate for electrification of buildings. And there are some really interesting studies. There was a really good, actually, we should probably share it with this board, legal analysis of the impediments to getting to where we want to go, and then some options for how we might work around those impediments. And there are two meetings in the last week that were both really helpful. Yesterday's meeting was all about the incentivized zoning options. So where we can't require certain things in the zoning bylaws that would, specifically, we can't require green buildings, say, that meet certain performance or certain construction standards, we are able to incentivize through zoning the outcomes that we want. So we might be able to incentivize by allowing greater density or higher, taller building structures, or expedited permitting as an option to get where we want to go. And we're exploring a lot of the options about which of those might work for Concord. And no, so far, the number of zoning ordinances have not passed in communities. They passed through town meeting, they've been approved, and they're sitting with the AG. So we don't have yet a model for zoning language that we can mimic, and we may be out there. And as you know, at our last town meeting, Concord approved the zoning bylaw for PRDs that had very loose language around sustainability principles without the firm metrics for implementation. So it's easier to meet, it's a lower bar, it's a step in the right direction, but we're looking at how you can actually get to measuring the outcome in things like greenhouse gas reductions or performance standards by changing the HERS rating, and if perhaps incentivizing multifamily developments to meet certain HERS requirements. So that's the zoning piece. The other big piece that we've been exploring, which may be something that this board would want to talk about, and maybe Kate can help, is a two-pronged approach for how we can keep advancing the conversation towards building electrification in the town. One is a non-binding resolution that the 24 or so towns that are participating in the RMI forum are looking at signing on to each individually. And it compels, it's a non-binding resolution that requests the state do a whole number of things to meet the state objective and allow communities to meet their local climate action plans. I mean, after all, the state's funding a lot of these climate action plans, and they will go nowhere unless we can manage the built environment. So it meets a lot of the mandate, but we don't have the tools to do it. So this would be a non-binding resolution, a statement of principle, basically, that gets passed at all the municipalities that are looking to do that and submitted to the legislature. The second part of that would be a request for home rule petition. And that would allow us to get, if approved, it would be special legislation allowing Concord and all the other 24 towns who choose to go forward. If approved by the legislature, it would mean that we would be exempt from Chapter 164, which is a general bylaw that limits us in terms of how we can mandate construction changes because of conflict with the state building code. It's a long shot, but it's a possible one. If the legislature sees that some 24 communities all want special home rule legislation so that they can do what they have to do for their own local climate goals, it becomes more of a mandate. That with a non-binding resolution that says, these are the 10 things we want to see from the legislature to allow us to advance our goals for climate change. So those are the big issues that we've been talking about. There's another session tomorrow, which I don't know that I can go to, on community outreach and engagement. So how do you frame the issues? What are the strongest issues, and how you manage the communications aspects of getting positive votes at town meeting. So that's a general piece of where we are. So there are a lot of meetings and incredibly good resources, and I'm happy to share any or all of them with you through Kate. There's a new study on the costs of constructing green buildings and passive homes. There's a study from Harvard Law from looking at the legal structure or framework that prevents us from moving forward in a different way than the one that RMI did for us. So I'm happy to share any of or all of those documents. Questions?
Thanks so much, Alice, for the update. I think I know I'd be interested in seeing those documents. I guess one question I had was, I believe Pam was also participating in the process. Does it make sense for an actual CAB member to potentially participate going forward, or is that not for whatever reason, not a great fit? Or just wanted to follow up on that participation opportunity.
It's always a great idea to have engaged people all around. Michael has actually been sort of on the background of this RMI endeavor.
Okay.
But that said, we have a team of 5 people. Each of the communities have 5. Kate is obviously the person for Concord's town government. And I think we need to grow the people who have the knowledge that we're learning, that we're gaining, to beyond this group of 5. And we just had a meeting today to talk about how we can expand that and get some of this information out there, because there's so much really good, vital information that will help us frame how we get to our next step. So, obviously I could talk for a very long time about all this, and I won't do that. But I will share some of those documents because I think they'll be useful. The legal strategies one is short, but really to the point about what the problems are and how we might advance our own agenda.
Okay.
Only a 10-page report.
Other questions? It looks like Warren, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, can I suggest we come back to this later in the meeting when we're talking about planning for our board's priorities for the coming year, to see where this fits? Because if some of these topics are a priority, that suggests engaging more actively than if no one thinks we should give a lot of attention to this.
Jake, you're chair.
Yep. No, I would agree. I think that makes a lot of sense, and we can consider it as part of the prioritization process that we're going to go through, unless anyone has other thoughts. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Alice.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to just share a different document now. Where is it? Here we are. All right, so in the last, I think, couple of meetings, we've talked about, what's next for CAB, and now that we have the action plan, climate action resilience plan, we've had a couple of meetings since that was released, and we're now sort of trying to transition into supporting implementation. And what does that look like? What does that mean? And what do we want to achieve as a group going forward to help support implementation, to support Kate, to support the town? And so I pulled together some, and with Kate's support, pulled together some thoughts here about, and it's hard for me to see what you guys see, and so this may not be as visible as I would like. So I'm going to try zooming in here a little bit, and just let me know if this doesn't look good or is too big or too small. But I just pulled together some thoughts. This isn't a work plan. It's really thoughts about how we can work together and work with other committees and parts of town to hopefully advance the plan as best we can and provide our expertise to the champions and the other partners that are kind of leading each of the key initiatives across the plan. I think there's 21 or 22 of them, key actions. So in this section, I really just am laying out, here's the purpose of building out a work plan and some of the areas of focus. And the first thing I wanted to bring up was something we've talked about in the past around engaging with other boards and committees, whether that's through kind of an actual liaison or through just attending meetings and trying to learn and get some additional information. And so we put together some ideas of potential boards, committees, or groups that CAB could solicit volunteers, folks who are interested in specific aspects of, for example, what the planning board is doing, what the new transportation committee is doing, CSAC and others, and can serve as really the point person for those groups and report back to CAB, and also hopefully, continue to build relationships with those other groups as part of implementation of the plan. So I know everyone is super busy, but part of this is thinking through, moving from providing feedback as a body and starting to kind of divide up and having a little bit more homework. I hate to put it that way, but just trying to use our expertise and the group's knowledge to help advance implementation. So laid out the kind of some ideas of boards and committees. There are, I'm sure, others that folks may be interested in. But this is an initial thought. I mean, I, as the chair, can certainly engage with the select board where wherever it makes sense to help make sure that we've got visibility to issues that we want to bring before the select board, or otherwise, if they're talking through other topics that are of interest, make sure to attend those. But I guess I'll pause there, and if Kate has any thoughts, or if there are any folks who want to comment or have questions, welcome feedback on this liaison idea.
One thing I would just add is that, Jake and I had talked about this, and, knowing that everyone is really pressed for time, that maybe just to start, it's just a matter of, volunteer for one, attend a few meetings, and report back, where you see it making sense to either have more of a permanent liaison or not. Maybe that's not necessary. Kind of get a feel for some of these other committees and identify opportunities where CAB might play a bigger role.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because if we're starting to think about how we're going to execute on our plan, it seems to me it would be really good to get a sense of all of the different leaders and committees and what they're sensing. And if they have questions, then it gives them a chance to bounce off for each of us, as well as for us to learn what are the priorities that they're facing, and sort of seeing potentially an intersection. And maybe in the beginning, Kate, like you're saying, it's really, for instance, learning. I really don't know how the planning board works, other than just sort of reading things in the paper, right? And I'm sure many of us could stand to understand more deeply, how do they make decisions? What are they working on? What are their priorities? How can we be helpful? So I think that makes sense.
Jane, I see your hand up.
I don't want to interrupt if there are other board members first.
This is Warren.
I think I see John and then Courtney. So go
Yeah.
ahead, John.
Yeah, so to be honest, the idea of attending another board meeting regularly is not that appealing, but so I was wondering if there might be alternative approaches where we ask for an opportunity to talk with other boards about the climate action plan and have a discussion with them to talk about where there's mutual interest and places to possibly work together. So I don't know how feasible Kate and others think that is or not. It's been a long time since I was on another town board, so I think things work differently these days. But
I did, just to that point, John, I did hear in the breakfast this morning, there were a couple of committees that were, meeting together to talk through specific issues. So I think there's, that happens. I think we just have to think through what exactly we want to talk through with that group and what's most relevant, and feel like they're up to speed enough on the plan that we can have a good dialogue, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just be concerned about attending meetings, you know, to kind of listen to what's going on, and that being sort of being a more reactive thing, because like the planning board, you'd be hearing their permitting cases and they're thinking about zoning articles for town meeting, and then we'd be reacting to that. I wonder if we might be more proactive and think with them, you know, where does a climate action plan intersect with what they do, and where might we find some way to have a sustained collaboration with them.
Right.
And then it feels like it's more focused and you're working towards something. But I mean, it's just a thought, and I'm probably maybe in a way that might even be more work, but
yeah, I think that one of the concerns that we were thinking about was, you know, we talked about maybe inviting different committees to come to one of our meetings. And I think one of our concerns is, well, everyone's busy, right? So we're asking them to do us a favor by showing up to one of our meetings. But maybe, to your point, if we can agree collaboratively that a conversation makes sense and can agree on a time, then maybe we take up one of our meetings and or part of a meeting and they take up part of a meeting having a conversation. And that way it's, you know, we're being proactive, but we're also kind of being sensitive to their time as well as ours. Thanks for that feedback. Courtney?
I definitely hear, John, what you're saying. You know, trying to commit to one more thing is daunting, but I do think, you know, maybe even if it's just a couple of meetings before that targeted conversation, you know, I think for me, if I were to pick one of these in particular, I'd have to probably do that just to understand what they're about, you know, what kind of, I think someone said it, what kind of issues they're typically facing, what, you know, and challenges, to be able to kind of think through then how we would intersect, and be able to integrate or what have you, the climate actions. One committee that or one group I was thinking about that maybe would be added to this is the DP. I don't know if it's called DP. It's not called DPW,
Public
but
Works.
it's the Public Works Commission. That might be a useful one to add to this, because, you know, they are really responsible for all infrastructure. Maybe less so for roads, but for a lot of the other infrastructure. So might be worth adding that.
This is Warren. I agree with what Courtney was just saying completely, that I would think that in most cases, if we're not already intimately familiar with the committee, you probably need to want to go to at least a couple of the meetings before engaging them in a conversation. I also thought of a couple of other committees where they should be on the list. They're ones I don't necessarily know enough about to say whether they should, but so I'm not advocating for them, but I'm just throwing them out as possibilities. One is the Economic Vitality Committee, and then the other one is the Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee.
Thanks, Warren. Are there any other board members who had some feedback on this, or otherwise I can go to Jane. She's been waiting patiently.
John has his hand up, and Michael, I see.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Hey, Michael can go first.
You're muted. You're muted.
I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see everyone because I'm having trouble seeing hands. Michael, are you there? Let me see if I can unmute him.
now.
There you go.
The, what about the Concord Middle School? Is there anything that we can offer, you know, that near net zero energy school that's going to be our flagship that we could benefit from? Should that have a liaison potentially?
I know Kate, you're participating in that committee that I believe had been on pause for a while.
Yeah, that's
Want to comment on that?
I'm on the committee, and it's currently paused.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna suggest adding the Natural Resources Commission, especially if we're gonna be talking about adaptation at some point. Kate, do you go to the conservation coffees?
Not as regularly as I should.
Yeah, me either. But I mean, that might be a place also to talk about climate, right? So the NRC hosts those, I think, monthly.
All right, Jane, thank you for waiting patiently.
Oh, believe me, you're more than welcome. And I think you guys were on the roll I was thinking about. I would caution everybody to just with the moment, we have 67 boards and committees, and many of them, if not all of them, could be engaged or understood from a climate perspective, because in the end, we all know the climate is kind of, you know, it impact, there's very little it misses. So with that being said, I might suggest that if you were going to come up with a master list, maybe a first step would be, Jake, you as the heavy being the chair, assign folks the job of reading through past minutes. You know, in other words, there are ways to familiarize yourselves with what a committee's been working on that don't require time on a Zoom.
Right.
Look at the charges, look at what they're working on, and take a broad brush. And then maybe you can weed through where, you know, a priority list. Which are the, you know, another committee I was going to suggest would be the Historic Districts Commission, because a lot of the points of, you know, because we are a town of many historic homes, and if we want to change, if we want to make changes there, we're going to have to engage with the HDC on, and it happens to be, you know, it's easy for me to look through my liaisons, but be careful what you ask for, because I've got 9 committees I am responsible for attending in addition to my select board. That is very possible for all of you. It could be your future. And I'm seeing John say no. So I would just, you know, I would caution you. I would also say there are other ways to start to winnow down the list.
Right.
And, you know, Jake, taking advantage of the chair's breakfast and maybe even having a sidebar with individual chairs. Hard to do on Zoom, but, you know, setting that up to
Right.
sort of see where the intersections are might give everybody a little bit of, you know, you might be able to come up with a plan that was a little bit more, was not as broad brush. Because otherwise I'm happy to offer you many boards and committees, and we are wealthy in them in this town. So, and then we haven't even talked about the non-Concord boards and committees like Concord Can or Mothers Out Front. I see Laura Davis's picture here. The League of Women Voters. I mean, there are many other points of influence or interest. So watch out or you'll become a select board, and I'm happy to invite you.
I think that's really helpful feedback. Thank you, Jane. And I think as far as next steps, it might make sense for us, given that we've lengthened the list of potential committees that we could talk to, and everything that Jane said, given there are 67 committees, not to mention all the other groups in town, it might make sense for us to talk about prioritization and where we think the types of topics that we want to tackle for the rest of the year, and that might help us focus in on which committees that we engage with. But I also think I like the idea of folks who are interested and curious to learn more about other committees to start the process of going through, looking at meeting minutes, learning more about those committees. And I can certainly start engaging other chairs as well, kind of in parallel. But do folks want to transition to talking through, trying to flesh out a little bit more of this work plan, and then that might inform which committees we decide we really need to learn more about and start kind of putting on our list of following and engaging with? Does that make sense?
I think so, because I think we really need to get our strategic objectives and then see how the tactical things like committee liaisons fit into that.
Okay,
Agreed.
thanks, Brian. John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense to try to prioritize. So, I mean, I think if we could agree like on what are the top 5 boards we really want to focus on, and I would like to think we could agree that the light plant board, even though Pam and Brian are now on the board, I think it would still be important for us to have a closer relationship with them because they're going to be so key. And then, I don't know who else follows from that.
Okay.
And I mean, I suggested the NRC just because I used to be a member many years ago when I know what they do. So it's an easy one for me to get involved with, but it may not be one of the top 5 that we should be involved in.
I think that's our challenge, right? Is, as Jane mentioned, sustainability touches all of these areas. And as we experienced when we went through the plan, there's a tremendous amount of work that, we could spend all of our time just on buildings or just one aspect of the built environment for the rest of 2020 and 2021. So we have to sort of decide, are we going to, how deeply do we want to focus, and do we want to divide and conquer to try and get some more engagement and hopefully help push things along and help provide perspective to more groups. But I agree, we do need to try and prioritize.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could use the emissions inventory as a guide. So in Concord, and buildings are very important, but transportation is also very important. And so whichever boards are most engaged there, that I think helps guide what the priorities are.
And Kate and I took a shot at this and looking at the plan and where CAB is listed as either a champion or a partner today, that folks may have interest in going beyond that, but I think it's a good starting point of what we sort of signed up for when we were going through the plan. That might help us kind of, again, focus in. And I think certainly built environment is a big part of that, where we're listed as a partner in a number of the initiatives. But we can go through that in a second. I saw Jane had her hand up. Was there anyone else who? Let's hear from Jane, and then anyone else who has comments can jump in.
I'm pointing out some of the conflicts you'll get involved in because I have to sign off now because I'm also covering the NRC, which starts at 7, and John's laughing. So I will read the minutes and watch the rest of this when it's streamed. Good luck.
Thanks, Jane. Bye-bye. Okay. All right, so why don't I go ahead and share, bring that document back up. Here we go. Nope, yep, this is it. All right, so these are again, potential activities for CAB or CAB members that we could look to cover in future meetings, as well as actually have people who volunteer to help do some additional research and maybe partner with Kate. Kate has offered to help support some of that if that's what folks would like to do. Or we could continue to sort of try and do this collectively as a board, but we will need, some point people on each of these to really drive this forward. Because, part of our role is really to flesh out some of the policy opportunities and some of the ideas that are listed in the plan, but that don't have anyone that really owns them or is necessarily going to bring them forward in the near future. So a lot of these you'll see, we've listed, okay, there's the potential activities on the left here, and then we put in the climate plan priority action that it links to, and then the specific plan element. So you'll see several of these in the built environment, one in waste, and then there's some thoughts on energy here. But one thing I'll highlight is just looking at the plan, we're listed as a champion for the kind of new construction within the plan, but we're not really listed as a key partner on a bunch of other sections. And obviously energy ties into built environment, right? All this is interrelated, but I just kind of use that as an initial prioritization mechanism. We can talk about whether there are concerns with that. But taking a look at these, what are your thoughts? What do folks have feedback on? I guess actually I would like to just have Kate chime in as well with any additional context and feedback on this, because I know Kate had some ideas that are definitely listed here where she felt CAB could really help her and help the town.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, big picture, climate impacts everything. And we have this plan with our 22 priority actions, but it's still an all hands on deck situation. So there's a lot that we can and need to be doing. So I think there's a lot of ways that CAB could go with what happens next. I think if CAB wants to pick one thing and really dig in and say, we want to look at the policies that others are doing, we want to design a policy, we want to bring it to fruition, and that's all we're going to do in the next year, that could be one way to go. It could also be, these are two of these things that we really want to do. And maybe that means that some folks or one person or two people kind of dig in deeper and bring things back to the group. Or you could, each take on even more. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And a lot of it just, I think, comes down to what time do people have to dedicate outside of the meeting, and where do you really see, the biggest opportunity, the most bang for your buck, quick wins, what kind of strategically you want to go for in the next year. But I think laying out a plan for the next 6 months to a year will be really helpful in kind of planning out what you want to do in these meetings, and what does CAB want to lead on going forward in implementing our plan.
I see John's hand up. John, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought unmuted. Can you say what this list is? Is it represent the, like the top priorities from the plan? I probably should know this, but.
So each of these priority actions is one of the 22 items in the plan. This middle column here. It isn't, I didn't go to the level of implementation steps. So there's actually, in the blueprints, there's implementation steps that talk about each of the items that, kind of need to happen to support, or the priorities essentially to support increasing electrification and improving energy efficiency of residential buildings, for example. But some of these examples are either not necessarily directly referenced. Sometimes they are, other times they're, it's a little bit broader. So it does tie into each of the 22 priority actions. So these are all, there's whatever, 1, 2, 3, 6 actions here of the 22 in this initial list.
Right. So you're not saying the other 16 priorities aren't up for consideration. You're just giving examples.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I was wondering why, there's no transportation examples here. So, but you're saying that you weren't leaving it out. It just wasn't here for the purposes of discussion.
These were the only ones
Correct.
that CAB was listed as a partner on, right?
Right. Yeah. So, and I don't think we need to read into that too much. And, Kate, feel free to provide additional context there. I mean, I know that there was some feedback on partners that were listed and, where CAB was listed across the plan as a partner. So I think in mobility, yes, it's what is it, 40%, 30% or so of the emissions. And we do have the transportation committee as an option here that I think recently formed. And there's certainly topics that I know a lot of folks are passionate about. And so there's certainly a place for CAB to provide a point of view and to focus in on mobility. But I just initially was looking at the plan and where we're sort of listed as a partner. That, again, I don't want that to imply that we can't look at other topics. Kate, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think you captured that
Okay.
well.
Warren.
Thank you. In some ways, we can have our maximum impact if we focus on some areas where there's some momentum, but uncertainty as to how they're going to turn out. And maybe with some additional effort, we could help push them forward. And just even what we've heard today, 2 places where I think it would be well worth our while putting in attention that have to do with the built environment. One has to do with pace. The town's gonna approve pace, but what's the plan to actually get businesses to embrace it and see the opportunity for PACE financing as a reason for them to actually do things in relationship to energy efficiency and building electrification that they may not have thought of before. That's one. And then the second one, this RMI building electrification accelerator seems really important. There's some potential for it having a big impact. That seems like a really good place for us to put some attention.
Thanks, Warren. Any other thoughts from board members on these priorities or other comments?
And actually, so if I could say, if Kate could respond on one thing I said, if you could say, is there any planning for how PACE is going to be implemented underway?
It's a good question, Warren, and I haven't gotten too far down that road yet. And I need to learn more about Mass Development, who's running the program, if part of their program administration is kind of the promotion and education piece. And if not, then I think that would fall to us, the town, to really promote that to the commercial customers as something that they should be taking advantage of. So I think that's a good question that I'll have to circle back with you on.
I mean, my understanding is mass development's relying on the private sector. So they're hoping like the contractors and energy service companies will, basically promote PACE as a way to finance projects that they want to get contracted to do. So I agree with Warren that would be a good task, that assuming the town's going to opt into PACE, that it might be useful for CAP to think about how to promote it, so that there's some uptake in Concord. And then just going back, I think these priorities look pretty good to me. I would advocate for adding a transportation priority, just because it's such a big piece of the emissions pie. I don't know what it should be, but I think that would be important.
Okay. Yeah, I think Warren brought up a good point about engaging in areas where we feel like, again, we can drive positive impact, where other groups aren't necessarily engaged on that topic, and there's support from the champions or the other groups involved, and like we can bring some expertise and some viewpoints to bear that hopefully will align with the outcomes we're hoping to see with the plan. And so I think we really have to think through and try and thread the needle of, okay, who are all the other stakeholders involved in some of these, and what roles do they already have? And so that we're not reinventing the wheel or working on something that maybe is in the purview of another group. Like I could see CSEC getting involved in some of the educational components around PACE potentially down the road. So I just think we just have to think through that. I don't have any specific feedback on PACE. I think that's a good suggestion. But I just think it's important. It's going to be important for us to kind of think through, and this, we may decide we have to evolve things once we start looking into it. But I also agree. I think looking at mobility and thinking through how we can hopefully provide support there is a good suggestion. It's obviously an important area of the plan, and so we should definitely take a look there.
Jake, this is Warren again. Following up on John's comment and going back to your earlier discussion about various committees, because transportation is an important area and there's nothing that necessarily jumps out as, hey, here's the obvious thing to do. Learning about what's going on with the Transportation Committee seems like an especially good thing when we're looking at other committees to monitor and see what their charge is.
I agree. I think that's a good suggestion.
So it's one thing that jumped out at me was the bullet talks about identifying and recommending sustainability standards for town-funded new construction. And at first I was like, yeah, that's right. That's, we want to do that. And then when I look over at the plan, I realized, oh, right, we were talking about that as related to buildings. And I get the reasons why, but it made me kind of go back and think about those overarching themes we had in the beginning of the plan. We talked about governance, education, and social resilience. And I guess, of course, I'm not a building person. I'm more of an infrastructure person. That's where I've spent all of my time thinking. And I just wonder if there's some role for this group to think through kind of standards for construction in a few realms, right? Buildings certainly are, of key importance because of the footprint, but infrastructure can have an equally important impact. Schools, I guess that falls under the town buildings, so maybe that's covered. There's probably other areas that I'm not thinking of that we could, expand that to, but just thinking how decisions get made, how sustainability standards are incorporated into the total built environment. And it would include transportation as well.
So Courtney, are you saying that there might be a broader infrastructure opportunity across not just the built environment, but thinking about how does the town think about developing and improving our infrastructure to support electrification and EVs and storage and all the things that are kind of in that plan as maybe an area that we should be potentially engaging in?
And almost developing a framework for, maybe this is too broad, but a framework for making decisions and making, I guess incentivizing projects to include and follow sustainability standards. So, I mean, we can develop the standards, but I think it's sort of going back to the RMI discussions. How do we, we may have to incentivize to actually get those implemented. And, maybe it's one vehicle for new construction, buildings, maybe it's different for infrastructure. I guess I was thinking almost a step above kind of the standards, but looking at, how do we, I'll just give it, I guess, a real example in that, a lot of our infrastructure projects right now come down to cost, and often it's the low cost, the low bid, and that's how a project gets built. But we know that's not leading to sustainable outcomes often, and we see some of the unintended consequences of some of that. And I don't know if that same mechanism happens in the building sector or not. Probably those of you who have more experience there might know that better, but just how could we give the town tools for broadening how we make decisions about what project is the right project, other than cost, other than first cost. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm quite capturing it, but it's sort of, it's related to the sustainability standards, but I think it goes and kind of broadens the conversation.
So it's taking this and maybe broadening it so that it's more holistic guidance around projects, larger projects, not just necessarily construction.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is still important. I, wouldn't want to get rid of that, but I just wonder, especially looking at the governance, the way we described that, it said, integrate sustainability goals, metrics, and evaluation criteria into town planning, including staff and department evaluations and budgeting. So kind of speaks to that.
Well, I mean, there could be a task of, there are different sustainability rating systems for buildings, but I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's a system for infrastructure. You know what it is, Courtney, but I can't remember it.
Yep.
So, I mean, it could be a task of thinking about what rating systems make sense for Concord and how might they actually be implemented here in a way that works for the town.
Right. Or I've certainly known communities that have gone their own way and, developed their own that works for them if those available ones don't. And then there are, you know, and then the town or the city is often empowered to include that in their, you know, their requests for proposals when they go out for different project evaluations and things like that. And it can be a useful tool.
Yeah, we're not covering resilience here, but at least for
Right.
state-funded projects, the state's rolling out new resilience standards for their projects and projects they fund.
That's true.
So that's going to be affecting probably the town in the near future.
Did I hear someone else who wanted to chime in?
I was just going to say something about the Ashrae Guidelines that for renovations and new construction that start to require the contractor to be responsible for the level of, you know, resiliency and energy efficiency and sustainability as a way to respond to Courtney's question about like, how do we incentivize residents, or how do we incorporate standards? You know, one way is to use what's out there already. So it was just another thought, but I'm not sure this is the right place for this conversation. So.
Okay. So, so we've heard from, you know, a good number of you and some specific feedback and some additional ideas. I still think we have this open question that I think Kate raised about whether the group is up for you know, doing some more dividing and conquering, and we have limitations, right, because of the meeting rule in terms of we can't necessarily say there's a team, like teams of 4 who can, or whatever it is, a couple members who can collaborate together on this. So that creates some challenges for us to divide up work and any sort of homework. But if I'm just trying to get a sense for how realistic it is for you all to say, okay, you know, I'm really interested in this topic. I think it ties to what the CAB is, you know, part of the CAB's role. This would add value, you know, based on feedback from Kate and from others. And I'd like to, you know, raise my hand to do some research here on this topic, or to dig into this and get more involved in this specific activity. Or do we feel like we need to keep this more broader for the CAB, and then we really dive into specific topics? Because obviously that will, you know, we will move as a group on a specific activity or specific action, but we won't be able to necessarily tackle as much, right? Because we already have a lot here, and we've talked about adding some other items. So I'd like to get just feedback from folks about that to help try and decide where we go from here. Did that make sense? Hopefully that was clear. What is your level of comfort with doing some homework outside of meeting time on some of these topics?
I think that these topics vary in terms of how defined they are. So like the energy disclosure ordinance thing, that's pretty straightforward, and you know, I would be happy to work with Kate on that because I know about that. You know, some of the other topics requires someone to start to you know, do actual research, and it's probably, you know, less defined. So someone's got to go through the effort of defining what it is we're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about everything we've been talking about, and I don't know how as a board we tackle that are moving to these next steps. But it seems to me as we look at the priorities that embedded in them and underneath them is the ask of an operations plan, right? It's okay, how do we execute on increasing energy efficiency in residential buildings? What are the very specific steps of, you know, of a plan that's laid out, that's executed on? It's delivered by a project manager. It has a series of dates and timelines and people who do that. And I kind of go back to some of our earlier board meetings where there was a discussion about is the purpose of the board to be advisors or to be specific implementers, to take one of these priorities that we have an interest in. John just mentioned one. I'm interested in residential, commercial building efficiency. And do we build an operations plan so that we become not reactive, but become very proactive? And that sounds like a much heavier lift for board members. So I'm puzzled too about how we can be effective in tackling this to create that movement forward, particularly with high impact practices, the ones that we already have identified in the blueprints as where we should focus.
I think the way I was thinking about some of these, and perhaps it's incorrect, but I was thinking about these projects as more of, or these activities could be more of, you're kind of making the case for a specific policy or a specific set of actions that the town would have to, and other stakeholders who essentially are either the champion or the owner of that, would have to think through implementation. So why does a time of sale residential energy score make sense? And we may, if someone looked into this, they may say, you know what, this actually doesn't make sense. That may be one of the outcomes. But if it does make sense, like, could it potentially work in Concord? What are some of the benefits that other communities have experienced from that? What's the case for Concord? And sort of essentially present that. And that could lead to specific action by CAB in terms of recommending, like voting on and recommending that, you know, whichever specific entities we need to influence, like we sort of present that and we maybe refine it. So that's how I've been thinking about it versus getting into like the operations plan would come after that. Like, oh, okay, wow, I didn't know this. You know, the decision makers may have heard about it, but may not be as familiar. And so our hope is that we influence them to dig deeper if needed, and hopefully take action to pursue that and determine if it's going to work for you know, for the town. So it's more of that initial assessment and trying to get a point of view from CAB on some of these items. And I think the RMI program is a little bit different because we have a consultant who's basically pulling together a lot of that information. It's really us helping to advocate for that. So there's less direct work for CAB on that, other than well, understanding it and helping to decide where we're going to push for action. So that's how I've been thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? I mean, we can, I know we're just sharing this now. And so it's a lot to kind of think about and decide, you know, what specific next steps are. But I think some of these activities are areas that, you know, we believe are opportunities for us to explore, and we can certainly work on, you know, carving out and scheduling time as a group to talk through that. And you know, I can look sort of offline for folks who might be willing to put some time in looking at these, so that it's not, necessarily on Kate or others to pull together that information. One of the things that we had, and maybe this will help, just moving to calendar items. One of the things we've been talking about for a while was having the light plant come in and talk about their renewable energy strategy. And I think that'll give us a good framing for, the plan to continue to progress towards the 2030 goal, and allow us to have some time for questions and answers. So Kate and I had talked about having that as a topic of our November meeting. And I think the hope is that we would take time in December and January meetings to talk through some of these other potential priorities. At least that would be my goal. And so that could give folks some time if you're interested in potentially identifying a priority that you want to look into, or we can kind of move down the direction of this, pursuing this as a collective group, and talking through, as we dive into this more, if people have specific areas that they want to, that they're willing to do a little bit more homework on. But right now, I'm not getting the sense that there's interest in kind of dividing up and doing homework. It's just not necessarily going to be realistic. And that's okay. I just want to make sure that I'm hearing that correctly. Warren?
This is Warren. No, I'm willing to help divide stuff up and to tackle one area. I would say several things, though. In terms of your list, I think it's the last one on your list in terms of energy. I don't think anybody needs to do homework there. You're going to put that on the agenda for next month. On top of that, I have a lot of faith in Alice and Brian and Pam, who are all familiar with our committee, that they, rather than us spend a lot of time monitoring the light board over the next several months, wait to see if they think there's some additional role we could play there. The two things, and either of these two are places where I would be willing to volunteer and help out on. One is, I do think the RMI building electrification accelerator stuff, that seems time sensitive and shouldn't just be thrown out there, because there is an issue as to whether anything from that initiative will need to go to town meeting this coming year. And so we don't want to put that off for 4 months. That's one area. And then the second area is, I do think, and I'd be willing to, I'm willing to do one thing. I'm either willing to do something related to the RMI thing, or I'd be willing to monitor the transportation committee, because I think that's one area we just got to get a handle on what's going on in town.
Thank you, Warren. Michael, I know you've been involved in the RMI Accelerator as well. So is that something that, and given, Alice and Kate are both involved in that, does it make sense to maybe keep that group as focused on kind of reporting back to us and sharing learnings and getting feedback from CAB? And maybe Warren can spend some time with the transportation committee?
I absolutely. I think that, I
mean, I don't mean to discourage Warren, sorry to interrupt, but I don't mean to discourage you, Warren, from digging deeper there as well. So, but just thinking through how many folks we have involved in that right now, and how far along they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think Alice and I, when we were talking earlier today, I threw out the idea that, this resolution idea, maybe CAB wants to be the group that brings that to the select board and say, we think you should do this because it aligns with the plan and it's really important. So we can certainly bring those things to CAB to say, here it is. Do you want to move it forward and support it, if that's helpful?
Yeah,
When
but I
do
do
you-
think Warren's point about the transportation area, I mean, I think that would be an add to have someone really connecting in that, because we don't have it on our list, and yet we know that that's one of the top priorities in the blueprints. So I would support that, Warren. I think you'd.
Yeah. The other thing I would say in terms of the building accelerator that would be nice if we were to become a champion of that and push it to the select board and elsewhere, it would be nice to have a longer, more substantive briefing for us of what you've learned, what the options are, what are the advantages of taking this approach versus that approach, as opposed to just an informal conversation of 10 minutes at one of these meetings.
When do we think we'll have, like, we can have a more detailed conversation about the RMI Electrification Accelerator? Like, when would be a good time? Is that something that we should look to schedule? Or is it too hard to tell to say right now?
I think soon would be good. Alice, what do you think?
So here are my thoughts. The accelerator is on an accelerated schedule. And if we're going to go for a home rule petition, I think that that's got to be worked on now and socialized and planned out. And we need to get the select board on board with it, because they will have to bring it to the legislature on our behalf. So the decision would be, does CAB want to own it, do all the work to get it as a warrant article, bringing the select board in and then moving it forward to socialize through town? Or do you want the select board to do that, or a group of independent citizens? So there are some big decisions to be made, and that has to be done by February. Because whatever the warrant article is for next June's town meeting has to be done by February, and there's a lot of work that has to happen on the short term, November, December, January. Time flies through the holidays.
So should we add, it sounds like we need to add that to a topic for probably for November then.
I would like this, I would suggest that if you're at all interested in being involved with the built environment, this is the place to be. You're joining 24 other communities. We have RMI support and great resources. And it's something that's time sensitive. And I want to say that it's really clear to me that this board and the members of this board are thought to be climate leaders in Concord. So you carry a weight of who you are when you go and meet with other boards, or you go to listen in on the transportation committee. What you're bringing is a big global perspective with a lot of clout behind you. So I'd like to use that social capital that you have to move ahead with building electrification and engage with the RMI as one of your projects. I think that you have a great opportunity to show leadership in the town for the Climate Action Advisory Board, because that's who your name is. People all around town should know each one of you, because you are the leaders.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah, I agree. And I think if we needed to, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for the light plan presentation. If we had to, we could look for December, and we have to schedule that anyway. So I think it's a matter of whether we want to invite the director or other staff. We'd have to try and coordinate that anyway. But with Brian and Pam on the board as well, I think that gives us some flexibility, and they can report back to us on topics there too. So we can certainly move that around. Okay, thank you, Alice, for that.
I have one more thing.
Sure.
to your point about whether the committee can do this, have little committees that do other part of the work, so you can have 2 people working on something, you can actually do that under the open meeting law. But when those 2 people get together to start chatting about what it is you're researching and who's going to do what, you just have to post that 2 days in advance so that it is a public meeting if others want to be part of the open dialogue. I mean, it's to say that you're not doing anything in secret. It's a transparent process. So say, Warren and Michael, I'm just picking this out of a hat, want to look into transportation and get some stuff together. They can do that as a subcommittee of the committee, and you just post the meeting 2 days before they're going to get together. And they can then say, Michael, I'm going to go off and read this, and Warren's going to study something else. They're going to get back together to talk. And when
I think with Zoom, it's even easier, right? Because you post the Zoom link.
Yep. And you have to post the 2 days in advance, but then you can meet as a subcommittee, and there's no running afoul of the open meeting law.
Okay. Warren, I saw you had a hand up. I can't see everyone here, but go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would like to urge you to move the light plant presentation and discussion to December, not at the same time as a discussion of the accelerator, because we've been putting off that light plant discussion. John's been pushing up for us to have an extended discussion about the role of renewable energy certificates. I think we need to have an hour at minimum for that. And that would not give very much time for the building accelerator next month.
Okay, can someone second that? Because I think that's a good suggestion. I guess I could second it, but
Second
any
it.
concerns? Okay, I'll go ahead and move that. We'll go ahead and move that and try. I think that also gives some additional time for us to kind of make sure that the light plan understands what we're asking of them, and they have some more time to kind of pull together materials that they want to share with us. So that helps as well. Okay, I recognize we have about, I think we have about 15 minutes before we need to transition to public comments. Is that right, Kate?
Yeah, and John has his hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to reiterate, if we agree that the commercial energy disclosure is an important thing, then I'm up for working with Kate on that. And I mean, I think it's also good to know, we're all in different places in our lives, so some members can't put in the time. I don't think people should feel bad about that.
Right.
Some of members have families and kids are trying to juggle, and some of us don't, and then there are other things. So I wanted to say that, and then and thanks to Warren for noting my concern about RECs. I'm not quite ready to give the light plant a free pass on that, but I think we should hear from them. I don't think they're thinking permanently of relying on RECs based on what Brian had shared with me. But I think it also raises the question of, is that a good investment in the interim? That money be better spent on a solar incentive program or an efficiency program? And I think also while they're buying RECs, there's a big question of how we count them in our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. My personal view is it represents a mirage in terms of emission reductions, and I wouldn't count them. And I think that's a discussion that falls in our realm.
Okay.
Warren,
Can
go
I
ahead.
respond to that?
Sure.
Okay. I just want to say, John's raised this issue a number of times at meetings, and I understand he's raising some important concerns. I've never responded, and I don't want to respond now, except to go on the record. I don't agree with his position, and I hope there'll be opportunity for other people to present their points of view as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's important we have that conversation. We have the light plant there to present their view, and for folks to to hear those perspectives. So we'll be sure to do that, hopefully in December, assuming they're available. I just was going to say that I want to make sure we kind of try and wrap up here in the last 10 minutes or so. I also just want to thank John for mentioning the constraints that different people have. I recognize just carving out the time for these conversations can be a significant ask for everyone. So I recognize, thinking about doing additional homework or attending other meetings or even looking through minutes can be a bit overwhelming, and the expectation isn't that everyone has to volunteer. I think we just have to recognize that some folks are going to be able to do that and others aren't, and that's okay. And so I just want to emphasize that there's no judgment based on whether you volunteer for a specific area or not, or can pitch in a specific area. So it's just helpful to get some initial perspective back. I know from my own, and Courtney, I see your hand. Just 1 second. For my own kind of interest in some earlier research I had done on this residential energy score, I'd be happy to kind of take another look at that and try and provide some additional perspective for CAB as part of like a homework assignment going forward. So I can sign myself up for that. And Courtney, let me let you chime in here.
I guess I just wondered if anyone thought there was value to the comment that I made earlier about kind of a decision-making framework, or as it relates to public projects within the town. I mean, I am unfortunately one of those that can't give a lot of time outside of these meetings, given all that I have on my plate. But but I know an awful lot about, especially the tool that John was mentioning that relates to infrastructure and making sustainable decisions there. I know some about LEED. I know some about some of the other rating systems that are out there. I didn't know if that would be of value, maybe not as high as some of the other things we're talking about, versus the RMI and that sort of thing. But if there's interest, I would be happy to, develop a kind of a educational presentation to the board just to talk about it. I guess I would be curious what people's interests were there.
Thank you, Courtney, for offering. I think that a framework like that sounds like it could be helpful for town staff and different departments potentially as they're thinking through all the different projects that they're implementing. I guess for me, I'm not sure how that would tie in. And I don't know, Kate, if you have maybe some initial perspective, but certainly, if we think that this could support better decision making, or thinking through like integrating sustainability into decision making around different projects that impact whether it's the built environment and infrastructure or all of that, that maybe that's something that we should consider kind of having like a facilitated discussion about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough to say, for sure what would be helpful. I mean, I think it could be an interesting discussion. I think it fits into that governance piece, leadership priority in the plan. So, yeah, I don't have any real firm at the moment.
Courtney, maybe we can connect on that kind of offline briefly and just talk through it a little bit more, and then we can decide where that might fit.
Sounds good. Yep.
Okay.
Good.
there anyone else who had additional comments? Just trying to look through here. Okay. So I think as far as some next steps coming out of this discussion, and thank you all for the input. I know it's can be a bit challenging trying to think through a work plan when there's so much that we could work on, and there's so much good topics to work on, and everyone has different expertise. But I think we have some initial next steps and some folks who volunteered to help support specific areas. So as far as the calendar, and I can just real time make some adjustments here. We know we want to have a conversation about the RMI Accelerator, and I won't type and distract myself, but we talked about CAB supporting a resolution and kind of preparing to bring a warrant and before the town meeting to support that resolution, so that this would be a kickoff to that. We talked about in December really having that presentation from CMLP. I think that leaves us some time in January for taking on a couple of the other topics that folks had said that they could take a look at. So I think as far as next steps, I can work with Kate, and I can work to further refine this and think about future agenda items. I don't think we're going to get quite as far down in this agenda, and that's totally fine. So we can work on that. I guess the one open item that people may not have the energy to go back to, and so I'm fine if you want to just ping me separately. But I know Warren had volunteered to kind of get educated on the transportation committee, which I believe just started meeting, right, Kate? So I don't even know if that's formalized yet. And I know we're gonna be able to get feedback from Brian and Pam on the light board. So if folks are willing to just ping me and let me know if there's a committee that you're willing to just, again, I think we talked about, even if it's just looking through the minutes, taking a look, like learning a little bit more about the committee, and you want to kind of raise your hand and do that, just let me know. I think even if it doesn't necessarily tie in specifically to one of these kind of priorities that were potential priorities that were listed here, I think it is a good opportunity for us to learn and get exposed to potential other opportunities for CAB to support different groups. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at those committee pages and think through who you might want to engage with and learn a little bit more about in whatever way that makes sense. I think separately I can also work on reaching out to some of the chairs of some of these committees and to touch on that other idea we talked about in terms of collaborative meetings, and maybe start the conversation on that, so that we can think about, does that make sense for one of our future meetings to have a collaborative discussion? We've got the light plant as one option coming up, but do we want to potentially meet with the planning board or others? So I can do some digging into that and have a perspective going into the next meeting. Any other comments or thoughts? Kate, did you want to add anything before we open it up for public comments?
No, I think you you really summed up the next steps, Jake, and thanks to everyone for your feedback and for volunteering to help move some of these priorities forward. I think we have good, clear direction coming out of this.
Great, thank you. Thanks all. So I'm going to now open it up to comments from the public. Laura?
Hi there.
Hi.
I have a question to start off with. I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of Alice's presentation, so I apologize if this was covered. But is one of the topics being tackled by RMI the issue of existing homes and incentivizing deep energy retrofits, or is it mostly about preventing new construction from being fossil fuel?
I think you want me to answer, is that right?
Yes, that would be great.
We have not talked about retrofits or deep energy retrofits as part of the RMI discussion. I think we're looking at the policy level decisions about how we can work within the confines of the legal structure in Massachusetts to get us where we want to get to. And that's a program that's offered by the, I think, investor-owned utilities. So it's a little outside the purview of where we're taking RMI conversations right now.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that's underrepresented on that list that you had up, Jake, is this huge issue of existing building stock and what are we going to do about existing building stock. You know, transportation is 30% of our emissions, and that needs to be tackled. But fortunately, we have a new transportation committee who is hopefully going to be looking at this with a sustainability perspective. There is no committee of our 57 committees in town. There isn't one that's talking about, you know, energy efficiency retrofits for existing home stock. So it seems like a natural thing for you guys to tackle. It's probably the most complicated thing that we have to do. And there's nobody whose job it is to do that. I'm sure that there'll be some sort of collaboration with CSEC because they do more of the education and outreach piece of it. But in terms of the policies and the incentives and all of that research that would need to be done, it would probably have to live with you. So that's one suggestion. And I think that as much like digging into these really complicated topics as can be and as can happen in this committee, I think that what this conversation made me think is like a big part of the reason that we have 4 electric school buses is because Brian and Kate did so much research and like so much work to bring those buses to this town. We need 40 buses. We don't need 4. And I think that we've only got 1 Kate. You know, everybody on town staff is incredibly busy. They all have to like collect the garbage. They can't research the new composting system. Like they have work to do that's besides this, what they're going to see as a very niche thing. And so I think that the only way that this happens is honestly through volunteer labor. We don't have enough money to hire the number of consultants that we would need to write the 2,500 plans that we need to get like all of this done in the next 10 years or 20 years or 30, you know, the more I mean, like I get everybody's busy. I'm so super busy and overcommitted, but like, you know, if we're going to get this done in the time that it needs to be done, we need working groups and we need them to be bigger than this group. We need it to be like twice the size. So I would love to see more leadership from this committee about like bringing the town together in discussions about how we get this done, because I think that there's no way that it's going to happen without your leadership. You guys are the Climate Action Advisory Board and you are the experts in town. So I'd love to see more participatory, opportunities for town employees, for residents, for groups like Mothers Out Front. There are many of us here tonight because we were interested in this conversation. So we're looking forward to seeing the ways that we as citizens can be involved and looking for leadership on that, because obviously there's an enormous amount of work and research that needs to be done in order to get this to happen. So that's my comment.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that feedback, and definitely some good points there for us to think through as we're planning, trying to put together this work plan. So thanks for the feedback. Any other public comments? Yes, Gilda?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
So I'm on Mothers Out Front. I was on CSEC for 3 years, and I know many of you, but not all of you. This is my first meeting. I was really impressed. You guys moved a lot of things, a lot of important things during this meeting, and you made decisions, and it was focused, and I commend you. So thank you. I had a couple of thoughts, and forgive me if you've already covered this at other meetings, etc. But one is that it seems that since the town has decided that we have an emission, a goal to reduce our emissions, that it's not up to any committee to monitor the other committees. It seems to me that, like, and maybe this is part of what you were talking about when you talked about government and leadership and I mean, governance and leadership, but it seems to me that, you know, it should be required of every committee that they be working on reducing our emissions. And that needs to come from the select board and the town manager. I mean, I'm sorry if that's naive, but it really is all hands on deck, and we can't have a volunteer committee requiring other volunteer committees to do things. It's just, it has to have more weight, in my opinion. So that's one comment. And yeah, I heard Michael mention his interest in energy efficiency, and I heard Laura, and all of us know that that's a really tough nut to crack. I would be interested in some kind of a brainstorm, participating in a brainstorming meeting around that, because, you know, I was on CSEC for a few years, so I kind of know what the challenges are. And also what, I think I know some things about what works.
Thank you, Gilda, for those comments. And I think I think the plan is really setting the foundation for the town, and I think the town is committed to taking action. And I think the plan is helping set the expectations. And thanks to Kate's work and everyone across the town departments who supported the plan and provided input, you know, we're starting down that path, and I know everyone wants it to happen faster, but at least from my perspective, there's a lot being put in place to help align town departments and activities against some of these sustainability outcomes we want to see. But obviously, there's a lot more we need to do.
Yeah, and I don't know what's already in place. So, you know, it's great if there's a lot in place.
Alice?
One last, I have to agree with Gilda. This is a really good meeting, and I think Jake, you did a fantastic job being chair this evening. You obviously put a lot of work and thought into it so that it would run smoothly, and you were strategic in your thinking. So that was great to see. So I appreciate that. I have one question I have is, does anybody know the status of the letter that CAB was going to get to the select board to get sent to the legislature? Now, Mothers Out Front sent a letter. League of Women Voters sent a letter. Mayor Walsh sent a letter. I think the more communication we have with the legislature of our interests, the more impact we would have on getting the outcome that we want. I don't know whether that's was sent or if it's stuck somewhere, and is it something a citizen can, you know, push along, or what can we do to help?
Great question, Alice, and I apologize. I meant to bring that up and actually ask Jane. I did get an email from her today before the meeting saying that the select board has adopted the letter. I don't know if they have actually officially sent the letter. So I will circle back with Jane and try and confirm that, unless Kate, you've heard anything else on that. Okay. But it is it is with the select board, and they were planning on sending it out last I heard. So I apologize, I don't have a definitive answer on that.
I just didn't want I didn't want that to get lost in all this conversation.
Right, and that was one of the follow-ups I meant to cover in my meet and ask Jane before she had to drop off. So I'll circle back and hopefully get an answer for everyone on that soon. Any other last comments? All right. Would someone like to move to adjourn? I don't believe I can do that.
I move we adjourn.
All right, all in
Second.
favor? All right. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.